Keynesian economics is based on the works of a British economist, Lord Maynard Keynes, who tried to explain how spending is going to affect GDP and therefore income. So he looked at the spending on the part of consumers, investors, government, and international trade, and tried to show how each one is going to lead to either a higher GDP or a lower GDP, trying to reach equilibrium. The ideal, of course, would be to get to equilibrium at full employment. Well, that's not always easy, and so we are going to be looking at government as that component which is going to correct for recessions and get us to equilibrium at full employment. We are going to try and simplify the model by looking at each one of the aspects of demand alone. We start with consumption because this is the largest, by far the largest component of GDP. Here's a table that shows how much is being spent and how much is being saved at the different income levels. This is what we will call the propensity to consume. We are going to be formulating the consumption function. So here you have an economy, and we are looking at how much will be spent in the different income brackets. So if you look, for instance, at 300, if you make $300 a week, everybody in that bracket will be spending 250, therefore saving 50. So you can see that we are making a modification saying that everybody in that income group is going to be acting the same way. Here, for instance, if you only make $100, you will be spending 150, which means that you are saving, or you are borrowing money, or maybe your parents are helping you out. Now, how about this part right here? How would you interpret this? Zero income, 100 minus 100. Well, many of you are not earning money, you are not working, you are full-time students, and therefore your income is zero. But it does not mean that you are spending zero. You are spending a certain amount, and that represents the borrowing or negative savings. At 200, we are what we call in equilibrium. And equilibrium would imply that you are spending, breaking even. You are spending everything that you have earned. So that would be right here. Your savings are equal to zero. Another way of expressing this would be to put that on a graph, the consumption function that Keynes presented us with. So here we have consumption on the vertical axis and income on the horizontal axis. That's very important. And it is also important to see that we are going to be calibrating both the vertical and the horizontal axis in the same measurement. So if 1 inch is 100 on the horizontal, it's also going to be 1 inch on the vertical. So putting the information from the table onto the graph will give you this one point right here where you spent 100 while you were making zero. The next point, when you did make 100, you were spending 150. That would be like right here. And then at 200, you spend the whole thing, so that's 200. At 300, you were spending 250, which would be right here. And at 400, you will be spending 300. So that would be a point right here. If we join those points, we will have what we call the consumption function, the propensity to consume. Now, as such, it's not really very interesting. What we need to see is, in reference to a particular line that is going to show points of equilibrium. So to show points of equilibrium, since we are calibrating the same way, we are just going to put a straight 45-degree line. So what does the 45-degree line represent on that graph? The 45-degree line will show points of equilibrium. So if we were to join those points, this would be your 45-degree line. So this is your reference point, and this is how much you are spending at the different income levels. Actually, that line should be a straight line, but I do not have I should be using a ruler, but just for simplification, to give you the atmosphere of a regular classroom, I just drew it by freehand. So this point right here is the point of equilibrium, like you had on the table, and it shows that everything that you have earned is going to be spent. We started by analyzing income of 300 on the table, and we see that this is exactly the same thing. Here at 300, you will be spending that much. So you draw a vertical line, and the line that you hit will represent the consumption, how much you're spending when income is 300. Where are you going to read that number? Well, remember, the vertical line represents the spending. So you go back here, and that's your 250. What does this distance represent? Well, this is your savings. And how much is this point? Well, since it's a 45-degree line and the calibration is equal, then we have a square, and that would represent 300. Let's kind of switch it a little bit. So this is going to be your 300. Therefore, your savings will be of 50, because this is 250, and that, which is also your income, is of 300. If you look at this closely, you see that Y stands for income, and GDP is for the output, but we're going to consider them as equal. If you go back to the GDP calculations, remember there were two ways of calculating your GDP. One was through the incomes approach, and the other one was through the expenditure approach. They were not identical, but for our purpose, we're just going to say that they are. So now, a few things I'd like you to look at. You will see that these changes are equal. Consumption goes up by 50 whenever your income goes up by 100. Now the change in C, consumption, divided by the change in income, is going to be called your marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. So change in C over change in Y is going to be your MPC. So how are we going to calculate? Well, let's calculate it here. So you know that 250 minus 200 is divided by 300 minus 200. And that's going to be 50 over 100, or 0.5. What does the 0.5 mean? It means that whenever you would be getting $100 or $10, let's say you're getting an extra $10 in income, you will be spending half of that, $5, and you will be saving $5. Since the change here is constant, you will also see that on the graph, that constant change is represented by a straight line consumption function. If you make this same model on graph paper, you will see that this is going to be a nice straight line, and so will this. So here we see again that your marginal propensity to consume can be calculated from this model as the slope of the consumption function. How do you calculate the slope? It's the rise over run. So let's pick two different incomes right here, and that would be the change in income. Now we're looking at the consumption line, so we're looking at this change right here in consumption. We know that this consumption here is of 250. And how much is this consumption? Well, if you look at the horizontal line, this is 200. So that change is equal of 250. That's your change in C. Now, how about your income? Well, it went from 200 to 300, so here you have an extra $100. Again, the same thing, 5 over 100, 0.50, 50%. Half of what you are going to be getting extra is going to be spent and half will be saved. What do we mean by extra income? Well, it could be a raise, it could be a bonus that you got, maybe you're getting a second job, or if you're looking at the family, maybe one more person is going to be entering the labor force, and all that is going to give you what we call this extra income. So, consumption function, the line itself represents how much is being spent at different income levels. We assume that everybody is going to be spending in the same manner at those different income levels. We need a reference point, and that would be your 45-degree line, and that shows points of equilibrium between consumption and income. But as you have seen on the table, there is only one point where the two are equal, and that's where the two lines, consumption and 45, cross. Before that, you have negative savings, or you're spending more than what you have earned. Beyond that, you have positive savings. If you were to look at 400, you know that at $400 worth of income, you are spending 300, kind of. This would be your 300. And you are saving, therefore, 100. So again, that vertical distance is equal to your saving. I hope that this makes sense. We will continue and add right now investments as the next step.